Welcome back to the Norfolk Currents podcast. I'm your host, Paul Rice. We're joined today with Delegate Jackie Glass. And Delegate Glass, how are you doing today?
I am doing well. Grateful to be here.
Yeah, we're really thankful that you're taking the time to join us today. Yeah. We've got you in today because you've released a new position paper on encrypting data on license plate readers.
Yeah.
So how did these license plate readers first pop up on your radar?
Well, there was some legislation last year when we were in the General Assembly. There were folks who were talking about whether we had done the right or wrong things with the license plate readers, who was using them. And that was the first introduction that I had. And I was just like, okay, what is this? I don't know what this is. And then, fast forward to within this recent year, I, like everyone else, saw the black pole pop up in the neighborhood and was like, what is that? And it became sort of a real thing of this is in our backyard for us, and like, what is it? Actually used you all as a resource and did our homework to find out what these were all about and what they were going to be used for.
Yeah, it did seem like it was kind of quick where all of a sudden they were everywhere across town.
Yeah.
So there were conversations going on in Capitol Hill and Richmond about license plate readers, and then it seems like municipalities are free to do their own thing. Can you help us tell the difference between kind of what's going on in Richmond versus what's going on locally?
Yeah, I think what Richmond is trying to do is determine, at least from the position that we're taking, is they're here. It's almost like maybe the use of the radar gun to track speed. Like, it's here.
Yeah.
Right? So then now that it's here, the conversation is, okay, so what are our stipulations with it? How are we calibrating it? All the things you want to know to make sure that that particular tool, because technology can be an amazing tool, especially for law enforcement.
Yeah.
But are we using it in a way that is fair and that is clear? And when we talk about, especially with license plate readers, that fair and that clarity is around people's privacy. And so that's the kinds of conversations that we're having specifically about privacy.
So can you tell us more about how these license plate readers work kind of in the maybe technical sense, and then how law enforcement is using them currently? Yeah,
so the license plate readers, they're special cameras, right? You can see they can be put on bridges, they can put on the side of police cars, on poles, if you see them around our neighborhood. And what they do is they take pictures of the license plate and they collect the data, right, on where that movement of that plate and all the information associated with it. So when I read the plate, I get all the information about who that is, details to sort of help police do their job. And I've actually ran into a constituent who said, I got a ticket from a license plate reader, not in Norfolk. I was like, here? That's what they, she was like, I was in another locality. And so that they're using those for here locally. I know they've used them to track where stolen cars have been going and get the bad guys really quickly. So it's fast data. It really is fast information on the movement of vehicles across the city.
And so it sounds like then in other states or other localities that it's not just maybe trying to help solve crimes, but also catching folks who are speeding or running red lights and that sort of thing?
Yeah. Yep, exactly. Okay. Exactly that. If you think about the way that we use cameras in our daily lives, whether it's we see something happen and we're snapping for tracking or what, that's the same thing these things are doing, only the fact that they are tied to your personal information and your personal movements. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And is there a baseline of rules that, police departments have to play by, whether they're Norfolk, Virginia Beach, Richmond, Northern Virginia, or is it kind of every locality up to themselves?
That's the magic question, Paul. Like, that's what is our baseline stipulations for how people use specifically the data? We have the allowance, right? There's localities get to choose whether or not they walk into the arena of having this sort of technology, but where we're at now is determining the important balance between having this tool, right? And then what we do with the information with the tool. How do we keep your information tracked? What I don't want to see happen is, let's say maybe the police don't like you so much, Paul.
Yeah.
Right? And there's one particular cop that's like, you know what? I'm going to find out where he's been going just to. No, we don't want that. I think and even police don't want that perception. They want to have these tools and allow these tools to build a level of trust. And so that's where we're at, is while we have the option to do it, I don't think that we put as we like to call them, guardrails to understand the other piece of when we start bringing machine learning into our world of policing.
So when we're trying to set up these guardrails for potential abuse, what are the cases of abuse? What could those look like in terms of, misuse of that kind of information?
Yeah, same. Like just tracking people that just because I want to know where this person went. There could be, let's say an officer had a partner and a spouse or whatever, and they're like, let me just make sure they go on where they're going. And that's not the appropriate use for that sort of data, which is why sort of rolling into what we're trying to do is look at how do we encrypt that information so that police are still allowed to do their job. They're still allowed to use this tool while also protecting your privacy. And I come from a background, I worked with encrypted information. So the question came for me as a former cryptologist and just looking at this as a person who's like, I saw what happened when that cop went to California. Like, let's just be like, there's that real fear there. It's not all bad, but there should be some. The Patriot Act has messed us up, okay? Just saying its own word. So what is it that we can do, right? And our goal in the office has been to figure out how do we hold both? How can it be a yes, we use this tool, and we respect people's privacy? So we reached out to people like IBM, some more experts. We're trying to get the smartest people in the room before we get up to Richmond in January to determine the best way to hold both in hands. And what we have right now is this thing called homomorphic encryption, which is really cool. I can nerd out on that, but I don't want to take us too far out on the path.
So you mentioned some, the future threat of maybe machine learning. What are those types of threats? What do they look like that should maybe concern people or worry them? Because, saying that machine learning could be dangerous with this technology is a little bit generic, but how can we make that realistic for folks who are listening at home? What does that in their day-to-day maybe look like?
What happens when I can go into use one of these LPRs, ALPRs, automated license plate readers. I should say that out loud so you understand what we're saying. And they're able to determine patterns for how I use my time, and that someone can use that data and really sort of predict my movements. Start making, say, you know what, well, I think, because she does this, this, and this, and I've seen her go here at 3:00 and here, and she's done that for 7 days in a row and then took a week off. They start determining my movement and my patterns. I'm a person that, I guess, military lifestyle has made me very conscious of having operational security, having different ways of going home. Like, just know that you got to have 7 different ways to approach that house. Don't come the same way. But the everyday person is not necessarily thinking like that. And so when I talk about machine learning, this is where these tools, because they are tools, start making predictions and start being able to determine. What's the thing? The Minority Report? Is that what it is?
Right. Yeah. It does feel a little bit scary future, dystopia, but the idea that they could predict whether or not somebody's going to be a criminal in the future feels outside of our normal criminal justice norm, where it's innocent until proven guilty, right?
Yeah. We don't want the assumption of guilt, right? But to also to hold that other piece in our hands is, I have to keep saying that it is a tool.
Yeah.
Right. And we're past the point of should we have these sorts of things in our society. We're here. And so I feel there's a level of responsibility that we have as legislators of educating the public, advocating for the things that make more sense, because I think it's an iterative process. We'll always be coming to the table talking, and privacy is going to be a thing that we're always going to be coming to the table and having conversations about as we implement more things into our society, and then legislating from a place of truth. Right? More truth and more understanding of our communities and how they want to see us use these sorts of things.
So the guardrail that you and your team are proposing is called homomorphic encryption, which I don't know if that's something that the everyday person has heard about or knows about. Maybe they heard about encryption, but can you tell us more about what it means for it to be homomorphic encryption?
Yeah, so there is homomorphic encryption is like where we have a specific math problem that we're trying to solve here, right? And based off that math problem, we have some secret math that we can do to solve that problem in order to get that answer. So specific math problem, specific answer. We use that secret code to get that answer, and then we go about our day, rather than having to open up everything, like doing the math, making everything visible in order to get that one thing to come out on the other end. I don't know if that makes sense.
So the encryption is built into the calculation or whatever operation that, software that somebody is trying to do. Is that right?
If I were to put it into terms of, how do I want to put this? It is creating a space where police can still go in and figure out patterns, and they can figure out and solve crimes without having access to everybody's information. So if they were trying to track me,
Yeah.
They could go in. Homomorphic encryption would allow them to say, we're looking for this specific thing, like that specific math problem, that specific plate number, and search for that. And on the other end, get the information on that specific plate. Not open up and know everybody's plate information. Then also track Paul and track Dustin and track, also track all these people, right?
Yeah.
So we're trying to ensure that if there is an emergency situation, right, if there's an emergency or extenuating circumstances, which we have to outline, that data be only accessed unless a court says that it's okay en masse. Or in an emergency, like there's an Amber Alert, we trying to track a car, absolutely want them in there, getting that, open it all up, track that car, let's go.
Yeah.
Right. So that's what homomorphic encryption is. And having the courts, I think, involved in that piece is saying that if it's your diary and you have a lock on it, you're handing it over to the courts and saying, hey, I only want you to open this unless you have a need to. And that's how security works, really. Is if I had a clearance, it was like, yes, I have a top secret sensitive compartment information clearance, but if I don't have a need to know for that information, that means I don't have access to that information. So just because it's classified this way doesn't mean I have access. So we're trying to make it make sense in that way, give them access to what they need to do the things that we want them to do and we need them to do to make our community safer without compromising everybody's privacy in the process.
And is this being used in other parts of the government, whether that's state, local, or federal, where there's places people have done this before that we can learn from and see it implemented?
Mostly in systems. And I don't think in lay terms, and there are computer systems that actually use this. So we talked to our IBM partners. They were talking about, like, this is not a hard thing to do.
Yeah.
If you say go, we go there. We use it with some of our data that we have. So it's been used as a means to keep information secure in government agencies through many different organizations. I don't know that I can think of a specific one. I know that there probably is one.
Okay, yeah, but it's commonly used and available, I guess, is the point we're getting at.
It is readily
well known.
Yeah, it's readily available. My question to the experts that we've talked to, and I hope if anybody else is out there, that we seek dissent and we also seek education, that we look at this from a place of execution, because I see that as a tall order to try to say that we want to encrypt all of these ALPRs that are all the way across the Commonwealth. That's a tall task. And also you got to have the people, the human capital that are prepared to work with to encrypt things. And then on top of that, if we know anything about encrypting software, is that there are updates that have to be maintained.
Right.
So we're looking at all these things from a place of, do we put that stress on a locality? Because I know localities get so upset, and they should be, when we at the state level tell them they have to do something and don't give them the money to do it.
Yeah. Unfunded mandates aren't popular, right?
I was going to say that, but I was trying to keep it, yes, unfunded mandates. But it is an absolute possibility. And it just makes sense. And just because something makes sense doesn't mean that it's something that we bring into law. It takes these early collaborations to get to a place where hopefully it makes more sense and doesn't have any unintended consequences when we get up to Richmond in the top of the year to do the work.
So you, in your position paper, talked about some of the potential challenges, one being that it's a computationally intense process. It takes a lot of extra processing to use the system. Do we have an idea of an order of magnitude of how much more computation this would take outside of the norm of what folks are doing, or I guess police departments are doing currently? Yeah,
so that I'm not the expert, but what we know is the understanding where this information is being stored and how we can readily access it and how to decrypt it is a huge part of it. The thing about the computation, or at least the piece that you're talking about, is that we know that the need for this sort of encryption may slow things down. Right, which is why there should be outlining of when we have an emergency. Sometimes you have to have a different procedure for that. But I don't have a wraps on what they're doing now, because we don't know how, and that's part of it, is how much encryption and how much they're using. But we know that not using this, right?
Okay.
So there are some conversations that we should be at the table with police departments and folks in the tech world, and to figure out what this could possibly look like and how much of a slowdown. Is it hindering the process? We're not trying to take away tools. We're just trying to have a little bit of accountability with them.
So you've mentioned talking with police departments and folks like IBM. Can you give us an idea of who all the stakeholders that maybe you've talked with or interfaced with or learned from as you're trying to get an idea of putting this new policy together, which feels like more or less a green space for state government?
Yeah, it is. So between, I know people think this is a bad word, but it's not. We've talked to the lobbyists of those communities, right? The representatives, the people that represent Chiefs of Police Association. Those are folks that are coming to the table. Sheriff's Association. Anybody that has a foot in law enforcement has a space at the table. What we're doing now, just to give an insight on how we try to bring people to the table, we're processing, thanks to AI, right? And thanks to the new tools, we're processing videos from the different committee meetings on this particular issue and finding out who are those people that came and spoke and
Right.
inviting them to the table. And then there's the tech space. There's some leadership in the General Assembly that does a lot around communications technology and innovation. Those folks will be another portion of the pie coming to the table. This is early, like we're talking in the idea phase.
Right.
Right. And we probably had maybe 5 or 6 conversations just around it with the immediate folks, and then we build. So in the September, late August timeframe, that's the time where we're really getting heavy with experts and people that really care a whole bunch, and we're trying to tweak and peak, as we would say, so that I can present it to the general public from a
Right.
place of, we've held all these people in our hands. Now it's your turn to take a look, chime in. Because our legislation has to be ready. I think November 1st is the last day that I can pre-file, which means I can put it into the state's system and say, I'm thinking about this bill, and I can start working on an actual draft of a bill so that I can show like people like you and the general public, here's the draft of what it could look like. Now, come on, let's figure out how we want to make it better.
And so do you have an idea of what some of the potential paths could be for implementing this? Could it be a state authority that is managing that sort of data, since it is a lot of time crossing city boundaries, or is it something else?
Yeah, that was a question that we started to dig in, but it was outside the scope of our initial conversations. However, because localities are using these things in different ways, I would suspect that in order to even bring something like this to the table is that there's going to have to be a healthy respect for how each locality is already choosing to use it.
But I know there's also a lot of times first studies that go through JLARC and that sort of thing. So do you know if this is something that is going to end up being studied intensely for a few years?
This is what my hope is, that we don't have to go down a study path. But oftentimes, that's the first path that we have to take. Which is
that why you're doing the pre-research now and conversations?
Well, that's why I think anybody does a research, because even now I'm a member of the Technology and Innovation Caucus, and we've been talking about AI. This is just to pull it all together. We've been talking about AI, and there's some stuff that, like, Pandora's box is out. Like, y'all, we can't. We need to be considering how our government uses it. But because we can't come to conclusive, this is the kind of legislation we want to see, and we're looking at other cities, we're going to have to put a study in. If that happens to this, fine, I'm okay with that, but I don't think we don't talk about it for the sake of realizing that we have to study it. And I've learned how to be okay with that, because that is frustrating sometimes when we already have data. We can look and turn to different places where we've seen this is probably a good thing, but I get it, right? The proof is in the pudding. People want to do their own studies. That's fine.
Would you say they're not necessarily exclusive then, that you can move forward with some ground rules and go and study more and get more data at the same time?
Absolutely. And sometimes, Paul, what happens is we find that we don't need legislation. Sometimes we can say, and there was a bill that I had last year where it's like I wanted to put it in legislation, but I had to work with the Department of Criminal Justice Services, and they say, hey, we can just update our policy to say X, Y, and Z. So as we walk this path, we may find, to your point, that there are other options, or that the timeline's going to be a little bit longer, because we don't know what the General Assembly is going to look like next year. We just genuinely don't know. We just don't know. And I think this is something that is nonpartisan in a way. It's just a matter of, I don't want to say ethics, because people use ethics in a different way. It's just a matter of when we talk about safety and holding people and police in hands, and knowing that we're just trying to do no harm on either side.
So the scope of powers that the General Assembly has is typically limited to Virginia, and sometimes, limited to how much they can interact with localities. Are you at this time looking at how this affects just all license plate reader data in Virginia, or specifically municipal police departments, or specifically the Virginia State Police, or even Customs and Border Patrol that are operating within the state, or the FBI working within the state? how are you guys distinguishing like where the jurisdiction is for some of
No,
that?
all of the Commonwealth. They're everywhere. So I think that the ability to execute is going to be very different in Western Virginia than it is in Northern Virginia, than it is in Hampton Roads. And and I'm so grateful that you said that, because I don't think sometimes people come to the table with a healthy respect of the fact that when we do things in Richmond, it doesn't just affect our little home base.
Yeah.
It's the whole field. And that is why this pre-work is so important, of bringing those stakeholders to the table and saying, like, I've talked to a chief of police out in Western Virginia about an idea I had, and he was like, well, Jackie, that sounds great, but in my neck of the woods, it's not the same. Right, because we're not a municipal police department, or we operate under a sheriff, or there's a lot to hold in hands, which is why, again, this is the work.
Yeah.
And I don't think a lot of times people get to see that. And I have a lot of respect for everyone taking their space on this particular issue, because they are going to come to the table with different lenses on what that looks like. But we have to talk about this en masse, because we execute it en masse.
Right. So privacy laws in general kind of exist in this penumbra state from the Supreme Court, where there's no explicitly defined right, but there's a lot of rights that kind of overlap to give us specific privacy rights. And then Virginia likely has its own kind of layer of laws on top of that. What's the, I guess, state of the privacy laws in Virginia now that, you're looking at that might affect this or be affected by this?
It's tough.
Yeah.
Because if we're just talking about privacy in general and the way that it is poked at, right? Poking at privacy, whether it's from reproductive care or from how we use social media to how our children use social media, to there's a lot.
Yeah.
There's a lot. I mean, we just had the law passed this year that said, hey, if you're a R-rated site, you got to figure out how to make sure a person is who they're supposed to be, right? So I think, Paul, what I'm holding in my hands is there's a lot of uncertainty about the way the General Assembly is going to look. And I don't know who's going to share values and who's not. And that goes on both sides of the aisle, right? Because we're all coming to this work with our own lived experience, with a unique community. I think it's going to be hard.
Yeah.
Because everybody wants to feel safe. And there is a mindset in some of the bills that I've worked on in the past 2 years, that there is a mindset that we don't want to take anything from the police. We don't care what it is. Don't limit it. Like, I've literally had those conversations where they're like, well, you're going to take tools away from the police. And I'm like, wait a minute. Wait, I'm not trying to take a tool. I'm just trying to say don't make fake documents, right? I think I will have a better grasp after November about how privacy conversations can potentially go, because that'll tell us what the General Assembly could potentially look like, and whether we're even ready to have the conversation. But privacy is at stake. I don't think we can't say that enough to the general public, is that while it is not the topic that everybody's talking about right now, it's a hot topic.
Yeah. And it's one that seems to not fall on partisan divides a lot, where there are some folks in the maybe right side of the aisle who are pro-privacy in terms of, having in a more libertarian sense.
Yeah.
And then there's folks on the left as well who are more, don't care about it as much, don't prioritize it as much. Yeah. So do you have a sense of kind of what a coalition or might look like for legislation like this, or who the most interested parties would be? Yeah,
that's why we're starting with the joint JCOTS, and the acronym is failing me. There's already a group of people in the legislature that are the Joint Commission on Technology. I think that's what it's called. Okay. So pecking at those folks that have some experiences, that have been here already, leaning in on the Communication and Technology and Innovation Caucus and committee, because there's a handful of them that we know will be back, that are in seats where it's like, all right, we know we're going to be back. And all of those things are bipartisan, right? To me, I think, bipartisan. But when I talk about the public, it is it is a system of beliefs at this point. Right. So I see a pathway. To have some real conversations. I just don't know how folks are going to be willing to come to the table. But I will say I have a lot of hope, because even as we're talking about AI, and we've got some people, a very mixed group of people that are ready and mission focused and people centered in how we take those steps, while also still, if you love law enforcement, you want them to have tools, still still being able to push that way and see, we're just trying to make a little bit more sense.
You mentioned bringing people to the table.
Yeah.
And for this issue, and then I'm sure other issues as well, getting people to the table who maybe don't want to talk is hard. How do you go about that as a legislator? How do you help try to bring folks together to talk about tough issues like this?
Yeah, I prefer to start I do a lot of individual meetings first before we do something big. Just as a heads up, I think it's helpful I found that it's been helpful when I reach out to some of the people that I think are going to tell me, go to hell in a handbasket.
Yeah.
And give them the heads up from a place of just truth. Here's what I'm working with. And you could possibly not agree with me, but you're not going to be surprised that I'm bringing it. And
Yep.
they're more willing to come back to the table. And that's just what I've seen, is that people just be upfront.
Yeah. Be included, right?
Yeah, just be honest with what you're trying to do. There's no, we're not trying to put this under the table and
is
spray
that
it on.
rare in Richmond for folks to be honest or upfront with their intentions on legislation?
It feels like it sometimes.
Don't mean to put you on the spot there.
No, I've only been in this space for 18 months or so, almost 18 months. And I feel the sentiment that people give me is like, thanks, man. And I'm like, for what, man?
Yeah.
They're like, yeah, thanks for talking to me. You didn't spring it on me. A woman said to me, she's like, I was never going to agree with you.
Yeah.
I already knew she's a representative for association. I was never going to agree with you. But what I can appreciate is that you still had the conversation with me. I'm like, okay, that's all right. I thank you. And I was like, oh, you're welcome. For the understanding is that when I take legislation up to the General Assembly, I have to go through the committee process at least twice before it comes to the floor and gets a vote.
Right.
And in both of those times, anybody from the general public can come and tear it up. Right, can come and sway the committee one way or another. So I owe it to myself and my team who put this hard work in to ensure that when we show up, at least we're not surprised by somebody's take on it.
Yeah.
Right, that we've at least prepared ourselves for the dissent,
right,
and have a way to sort of counter that or say, there's nothing we can do. That is a sentiment that, yep, absolutely, it is going to do this and come from a place of truth. It's work, but that's the hard part, because some interesting people come up there.
Yeah.
Or show up on Zoom.
So the committee process is tough. I know that a lot of bills every year die in committee and kind of never see the light of the floor. What committees are you planning to kind of move this through?
So that is at the pleasure of the Speaker of the House. I would imagine that this one might go through court because of its dealing with policing and things like that. I believe that, and we're talking about court orders and things like that. But it just really depends on who that speaker is and where they want to put that bill. I just heard a story the other day where a guy, he's like, he was trying to pass a bill. He knew it was going to go through a particular committee, talked to the speaker put it in a different committee so that it can make it through. This was way back when.
Yeah.
He's like, he just moved it to a different committee where I had the votes and we got it done.
Wow.
God. So there's a lot of power in whomever holds the House and whoever the speaker is of determining where these goes. It's where we'd like to go. It's probably, I think, courts, but there's a level of, there's a rhyme and reason, but also there could not be a rhyme or reason to where it goes.
Obviously, between now and when this is entering the General Assembly and the legislative process, we've got a lot of elections coming up, and the makeup of the General Assembly could change.
Yeah.
Do you think the fate of this will be very different depending on an outcome in the election in November, one way or the other?
Yeah, it could. So I'm on the left side of the aisle. So sometimes there's just spaces where the other side decides you're just not going to get it when. Even if it's, and that happened to me last session where it was like, great bill, love it, glass. It's not going to pass. But I even got a phone call from two people on the other side about two bills that they killed, like, hey, I want to work with you on this next year.
And is that because those are bills that just weren't, top 10 priority for the session, or because they didn't want to give you a win for your own kind of political gain, or what's the kind of,
it could be any of all of the above, Paul. You never can know unless you direct ask. It was just like, for us, we knew that there was a list of things that just were not going to happen, and they weren't for us to know until we got into committee and we found out that they were not going to happen.
Yeah.
But that's why we say it's really important to have people butts in seats that align with your values so that you can get and see some of the things done. Because it was low lift stuff like, solar, consumer protections for solar. It's not controversial as just saying, hey, we need to protect people that died. Trying to get work funding for creative entrepreneurs and independent content creators that died, while there were people who wanted to vote for it who just could not. That's just the nature of that's the cog, that's the system that we're in. But like I said, for both of those bills specifically, I've had people on the other side of the aisle reach out this summer. I was like, can I work with you on this? Because I really want to. And it's good because if they're on that committee and they're decide to champion the bill with you, it has a higher chance of passing. And so that's what I'm hopeful for, is that we can find someone on the opposite side of the aisle that'll be able to help us work this in a way that we can all agree that, yeah, this is probably something that's necessary, or it's a walking start.
So as you develop this policy on homomorphic encryption, where does this sit in your kind of suite of things that you're going to Richmond this year to do? Is this a big, top 10 priority, top 2 priority, or something else that you're exploring this year?
I'm committed to carrying 12 bills max. Even though we can draft over 100, I feel like we take these pieces of legislation and I treat them like they're my own kid, right? Like I'm going to give them the love, the care, and the attention so that when I show up, they're getting the best version of me, not leftover versions, or I'm not passing them off to someone else to help me figure out how to make it go through. This sits on the list. It will make my top 12, right? It will, it will make it into the 12. What we're doing right now is chunking our possible legislation. We're chunking them and then allowing space to say, all right, we've got bills that are dealing with the care economy, right? And then we have bills that are dealing with the creative economy and dealing with the economics of crime. And this is one of those. There's the economics of crime that are many things, but it's in there. Is it in the top 5? No, it's not in the top 5. This is just something I think it's a little niche.
Sure.
It's a little niche, but the former cryptologist and just curious person, and also just understanding security and privacy part of me says that it's important enough to at least bring it up, head it up. And even if I find a better patron, because there's a possibility I could pass this off to somebody else to carry, right? There'll be a lot of new legislators, who knows? But to me, it's enough to bring to the forefront to hopefully get the right people or right person to be able to champion it if it's someone's number one priority.
So when you're bringing, I guess, new ideas and new policies and trying to bring them into bills, do you sometimes see ideas like this get drafted into 3 or 4 different versions of bills, and then you have to kind of pick one that's gonna be the flag holder to take it forward?
That's how. So it could be a situation where you and I both put in a bill that is essentially the same. If we sit on different sides of the aisle, then whoever's got the most butts and seats is probably going to be the one carrying that. And I would ask, and maybe that was you, and I would ask, hey, can I co-patron that with you? Can I chief co? That's an idea that and you could very well say, no, I don't want you signed on this bill with me. It's mine.
Right.
Or there's space to, if we're both on the same side of the aisle, to say, hey, let's go ahead and I'll come under your bill, you'll come under my bill. What I've seen is the more senior person typically gets to be that chief, and then the other person will become a chief co-patron or whatever that looks like. That gets worked out. The goal is really to get 2 bites at the apple. What I mean by that is you have the bill sitting in the House and you have the same kind of bill sitting in the Senate, so that if it dies in the House, you still got a chance in the Senate, and vice versa.
Right.
But that happens. It does happen where people are coming together. And what makes me a little bit nervous, and makes many people, you won't see a lot of people talking about their legislation this early, because there is a possibility that somebody else will just take it, right?
Yeah.
And present it as their own. That could be sitting on the same side as the aisle as me, or sitting across the aisle from me. That they're like, oh, that's a good idea. Glad you thought of it. It's mine now. Right? That's a real thing. But I do believe in a sense of radical transparency, and the invitation of giving the general public an opportunity to be a part of, before I put this cake in the oven.
Right.
I want you to know, let's make sure we got the right ingredients. Because once I put it in there, there's only so much tweaking that we can do. And that's what happens, is we can change. We get many drafts of the bill. Just, all right, we want to edit. I've had bills be changed right there in committee. The lawyer is sitting there changing them right there in the moment. So it's not done until it's done. There can be many iterations, and you hope that you're in a space where if someone believes in the thing that you believe in, that they work with you and not against or counter to you to make it happen.
thinking about the other folks in the General Assembly who, might work with you or against you on this, have you started to reach out to folks who you imagine will probably be in the General Assembly next year to patron this or co-patron this or work with you on it?
So that'll happen next month. We're in the phase of, we've brought some folks to the table. We've had the conversation. Let's see what we can get. Let's see if we can get something drafted, and then take it to some of my fellow legislators and say, hey, I've got this thing. Here's the folks I've talked to. Here's what we drafted. Can you take a look at it and see if it might be something that you're interested in? That's the better way to sometimes get other legislators involved in it. It's like, all right, and even for some of the stakeholders, like, hey, when you get a draft, let me know. Let me see. Yeah. Let me see what you come up with, and then we can work from there.
Right. So you find that having the groundwork done first is a better way to approach those conversations than
some of them.
Too early. Yeah.
Some of them. Sometimes you just need other people. There have been other folks that have put some work in that you're like, can you point me in the right direction? And they can give you 2 or 3 people that you might want to talk to.
Right.
And you do I don't want to say you can't have so many chefs in the kitchen. You want to get a product and start getting people to taste test. So if you got to make a different meal, you make a different meal.
Right. I appreciate you taking the time to talk about this with us and tell us about a piece of legislation that is maybe a little bit wonky and not something most folks at home have heard about, but seems to be really important. And, especially as we look forward to future technology coming out. Where should folks follow for more updates if they're looking to follow this piece of legislation as it makes its way through your office to the General Assembly, et cetera? Yeah,
so we're right now, anybody who has a really great idea or just wants to be a part, we've built a website called Build in Public VA. So buildinpublicva.com, where you can see some of the things that we're bringing forth. You can suggest legislation or suggest opportunities to our team. Yeah. And also make comments on some of the things that we already have. So Build in Public VA is a great place to see what we're doing. Every Thursday, I'm sort of trying to live on all the places at 7 a.m. trying to have that conversation. Our website, delegatejackieglass.com, if you go to contact, that's an easy way to say, hey, I'm interested in this, or I got an issue. Because I know that most people aren't walking to us for legislation until it's the last minute. They need help with utilities, or they have somebody incarcerated they want checked up on. So just anything that we can be of service with there. But I will say this, is that if you're starting to talk about what you want to see happen in the General Assembly in December, you're late. January, you're behind the ball. This is the time. September, October, if you have an idea, if you want to connect with I could not be your legislator, that these are the times that you should be reaching out and touching and saying, hey, I have this idea. When we get up there in January, we're limited to maybe 5 more things that we can bring in, possibly, maybe. So you want to catch them early. It's like the budget. When they start telling you, make your opinion on the budget is pretty much made.
Yeah.
So it's a good opportunity. This is the season.
Well, I'm, for one, excited to follow this and see how it progresses over the next couple of months. So thanks for joining us.
Gratitude.